Right. So thank you all for joining me today. My name is Shafreen Syed, and I'm a solutions architect here at AWS. I have a lot of slides to go through, and hopefully a lot of good content that you guys can have some key takeaways from. So I'll take questions at the end of the session, but of course, if you haven't already, please do go around meeting or Ask an Architect, where you have my colleagues that can help you with more questions. So let's dive into implementing. So I've split this presentation into 7 sections, and we'll go through each of them in a lot more detail. Security by design principles, implementing a segregated account environment. We'll look at strong identity foundation, enabling traceability, applying security at all layers, automating some of the security best practices, and protecting your data both in transit and at rest. And then, of course, preparing for security events. A big shout out to our partners, our ecosystem, which consists of our APN partner network. We have thousands of technology and consulting partners that can help you and handhold you throughout a project or multiple projects if you choose to. We have the AWS Marketplace, which has thousands of products, third-party products that you can plug in and integrate with your existing AWS infrastructures. Moving on to implementing a segregated account environment. Well, the first managed service that comes to mind when I talk about this, and when you look at a multi-account structure, is AWS Organizations. So let's start with the AWS Organizations master account, under which you could have multiple accounts, one for logging, for internal auditing, maybe for Direct Connect, where your networking team can have access to. You could have a shared services account for your domain services as well, which then you can use cross VPC peering with. And on the right-hand side, you see that you have your resources accounts, which could be your production environments, they could be your dev and your test environments. And the reason to create these is typically because you could have people working autonomously and semi-independent of your main production accounts. So when things go wrong, when people are writing test bugs, or if there is something blows up, you know that your mission-critical production accounts are not affected. The bottom of the screen, you see Amazon CloudFormation stack sets. It's a fairly new release that we've announced that works with AWS Organizations in specific. So you can build, deploy, test across various accounts all in one go into that entire fleet of accounts if you choose to do that. Moving into strong identity foundation, I think most of you may have heard here about IAM, which is Identity and Access Management. We're talking about authorizing and authenticating users to be able to access your resources. We'll talk about defining accesses and protecting your AWS credentials. I have a good example on fine-grained authorization as well, which we'll go through, which is a policy that I'll talk you through as well. So when you're talking about defining access, and when you create a brand new account, you create a user, the first thing you think about is, what does this user actually require access to? And you need to think carefully about that one, right? You can obviously use federation. So you can use SAML for federation as well, and then you can define management policies. So think about this when you talk about joiners, new joiners, leavers, and new starters as well. Logical group users, when you're thinking about groups and applying group policies. Services, think about least privilege access, and when you think about roles, you can apply these roles to instances and functions. So say, for example, it could be an EC2 instance, it could be ECS, EKS, or Fargate, for example. Protecting your AWS credentials, well, establish least privilege access. MFA on the root account, that's a big shout out, right? I think this may have been repeated so many times in so many presentations. And why just the root account? Think about your user accounts as well, specifically around when they need to delete an object or a bucket within S3. That just prevents accidental deletion. So bear that in mind. Federation, it's a good thing, right? It drains away personally identifiable information from IAM. So when you want to do group-to-group level federation, you can think of it. And all IAM needs to know at that point of time is O equals, OU equals, and DC equals. And you're good to go when you're dealing with a multi-account structure. Avoid baking API keys in your source control. That's an important one to remember. And of course, you can use managed services like AWS's SDS to create temporary credentials. If anyone of you have noticed, I have the same least privilege principle in the last 3 slides, and that's my first point. And there's a reason why I have it so many times in the same presentation, to create the emphasis of why we need to do this. We internally within AWS also operate on the exact same thing. We operate on a need-to-know basis and least privilege principle as well. And I think you guys should do that the same. Users have no permissions by default. Groups have permissions to assume roles, and roles have permissions to do necessary stuff, right? You can, of course, manage, like we talked about AWS organizations, you can centrally manage access through there as well. A quick example of a policy, it just shows that the first half of the policy is allowing a particular user to list a bucket within S3. And the second half is more granular permissions that you can provide, where that user is then allowed 2 actions on a specific bucket, which in this case is put object and get object. This one is good to remember. In fact, there is a really good video from reInvent 2016, I think, where you can go into greater details about policies. It's called Becoming a Policy Ninja from 0 to 60. It's literally 60 minutes worth of JSON. So be prepared for that. Have lots of coffee before you actually attend that one. Moving on to, shifting gears a little bit, moving on to Guard Duty, one of my favorite services. It's literally threat detection as a service. It's so simple to use. It takes 1 click of a button to turn it on. And you're protecting against DDoS as well. It is continuously monitoring your systems, and it protects against accounts. Not only that, just also your applications and services that you run within them. One of the things that Guard Duty does is it outputs to CloudWatch. So what you could do is push the Guard Duty. It comes with the characterization and risk measures. So you could actually push that into a Lambda function, which would then push the Guard Duty findings into either a Slack channel of your choice. So it could be Jira or it could be PagerDuty. So the more severe ones can go to PagerDuty, so you get alerts. The minor ones can go to maybe a Slack noise Slack channel where your admins have a close eye on. Moving on. Guard Duty detects known as well as unknown threats. It consumes feed from various sources. It anonymizes proxies, and you can. So one of the things that gets picked up is cryptocurrency. And when people find mishandled keys, one thing that they typically do is start mining Bitcoins. And Guard Duty picks this up and stops this. So that's pretty impressive. It also detects unknown threats, so anomaly detection. You have algorithms. It runs on machine learning classifiers as well. That is inbuilt, and you have profiling normal looking as well as deviations for this. So what does this service actually detect? Well, this slide is already out of date. We have the Guard Duty team. A couple of weeks ago, they actually released 12 new detections and findings, which has now taken up the score of 46. And that's why I've put this link here. Don't worry, the slides will be available for you guys. I have a lot of resources after every section of the slide, so you can actually refer to them. Obviously, it does. A lot of customers also ask us, and Guard Duty does provide, is DNS exfiltration, so it does detect it. These are some of our Guard Duty partners. If you do not feel comfortable, you can engage these, and they will help you through it. And like I said, these are the resources that I was referring to, which I'm going to, the slides will be available after, so you can actually go through them in a lot more detail if you want to dive deep. Moving on to the next section, which is enabling traceability. You have detective controls. So we're talking about not only capturing and analyzing logs and using them, but you're also talking about integrating auditing controls with notifications and workflows. And I have a really good example that I'll share with you guys today. So one of my colleagues, who is a specialist security solutions architect, and it'd be good if you see him around, called Dave Walker, has come up with this. If it moves, log it. If it doesn't move, watch it till it moves, then log it. It's just emphasizing on the importance of logging. And of course, there are various tools that you could actually use. If you can use CloudTrail, you can use AWS config. For auditing purposes, you can have CloudWatch logs, VPC flow logs for all of your networking traffic, ELB logs, API endpoints, Redshift, so on and so forth. We have tried to categorize these, but it's really difficult to do that because some of the loggings might fit into one or more of the categories. In this case, we have infrastructure logs, service logs, host-based logs as well. And these are really important when it comes to security-related events. And that is why these are highlighted for you guys to take a look at. There are multiple levels of automation that you can do. You have AWS CloudTrail. If you go ahead with a self-managed one, you can have AWS CloudTrail pushing into CloudWatch logs, which then pushes into CloudWatch alerts, or CloudTrail sending out SNS, which is your simple notification service, which then feeds into a Lambda function to then action something. You have AWS config rules and Amazon Inspector. And Inspector, we won't go into a lot more details about Inspector, but it is a security assessment service that helps you improve your security and compliance of your infrastructure as well as your applications. It does automatically assess your applications for vulnerabilities and best practices and deviations from best practices as well. I really like this one. I've used this a lot in the past when I was a customer. And this one is AWS Trusted Advisor. It's just available. It's like an online resource. It's available through your AWS console, whether it's your basic support or enterprise support customer. It just gives you a lot more visibility on what you have in your accounts. So things like performance, cost optimization. For cost optimization, it does a really cool thing where if you have EBS volumes or elastic IP addresses, which you may know that if EIPs are not attached to an instance, you get charged for them, it will actually reflect here and show you that this is what may be causing your bill to go up. Of course, it is part of a security presentation, and security is what it also highlights, which is why it's here. It shows you things like MFA on root accounts or security groups that may have security risks. And a new one, a recent one that was added to this is service limits. So say, for example, you're using Amazon Kinesis streams. It will show you the number of shards that you have, so you can pre-plan. And these are some of the resources, and I'm going to skim through those. So applying security at all layers. Defense in depth. This is a good place to talk about our shared responsibility model, where AWS takes responsibility of the physical infrastructure, so security off the cloud, and customers are responsible for the security in the cloud. So your architectures that you design, your infrastructures, that is all, and we have tools, right? We have, you can have network and host level boundaries, you can have VPCs, security groups, network ACLs. I've got a really good picture that I can go through this with you, a quick explanation on what these are. And then you have system security, where you can actually harden your AMIs, make sure that you have OS and patch management, or use managed services, right, where we do all the heavy lifting for you, which is one of our goals at AWS anyway. Data, which is most sensitive, which is most crucial to you guys, is make sure that you have access controls and authorization in place, and also encryption, and we'll talk about those. So protecting your network and host level boundaries, think about it for securing external connections. You're probably looking at VPN connections, or maybe direct connect, or for low latency, high throughput. You could have ELBs, ALBs, or elastic load balancers, application load balancers, or network load balancers. If you're using Bastion host, which is not recommended for production servers or production environments, then make sure that you're at least using SSH to connect through. You can use root tables to deny internet access for a protected net subnet. So you have multiple subnets, private and public subnets. Your applications don't need to be in a public subnet. And you can restrict access using between those subnets using network ACLs, and within your instances using security groups. So moving on to AWS Shield. How many of you here are using AWS Shield? It's not a lot of people. This one's actually available by default. It's available to everyone. The standard protection is just available to everyone by default, right? It comes in 2 flavors: advanced protection, the standard one. For the advanced protection for additional protection against larger or sophisticated attacks, it is available for application load balancers, classic load balancers, CloudFront, and Route 53 as of now. And these are some of the things that our customers told us were important to them and are included in the AWS Shield Advanced, which is always monitoring and detection, attack notifications and reporting, 24/7 access to the DRT team, which is our DDoS response team, and AWS build protection. So if you do come in a situation where you do have an attack, then your AWS build is actually protected if you have Shield Advanced. And then you have L3, L4, and L7 DDoS protection, which brings us into layer 7. When you talk about layer 7, you have AWS WAF, which is your web application firewalls, which does web traffic filtering and custom rules. Big shout out, we do have managed WAF rules now available through Marketplace, so things like F5, Alert Logic, Imperva. It does go ahead and block malicious requests and actively monitors and tunes. How many of you, out of interest, have taken a look at artifacts? This is actually a really, really good place to go to when it comes to security and compliance documentation that are available to you guys on demand, especially the SOC report. It actually gives you an insight into how we do, how auditing takes place at our end and how we run things. So I urge you to look at that one. And shifting gears again a little bit, system manager capabilities. It does, you can do configuration and administration, update and tracking and share capabilities. So feel free to use the run commands and state manager and patch manager and automation. And the reason why you would do this is so that you don't necessarily need to give admins access to it. System manager can do this for you so you can have a repeated and consistent way of deploying the same command to multiple instances. And these are some of the resources for this, which takes us into the next section, automating security best practices. So we encourage our customers to build throwaway, immutable infrastructure, and there's a reason for that. When you do that, you can either use CloudFormation or Terraform, whichever one that you're comfortable with. You can build, test, deploy, recreate much more easily and efficiently when you're using these automation tools. You could use the CI/CD pipeline, which is continuous integration and continuous development, where you would automate that pipeline. And of course, you can use AWS config rules. I've put these two down in specifically because these are fairly new, and with S3 bucket policy, public read prohibited, it automatically checks for global write access, which I don't think is normally going to be a requirement for someone, because it just gives unauthorized users to upload malicious content and delete by overwriting the existing content of a bucket if you have this. And then, of course, you have the S3 bucket public read prohibited, which, again, automatically checks for global public read access to your bucket. So it could be anything from web services to your documentation that you have available. Both of these rules checks for all of the accounts, all of the buckets throughout your account. Okay? Amazon Inspector, this is a good one to talk about here when it comes to detecting known vulnerabilities. If you have, so think about an AMI that you're running a web service, you're running Apache and PHP, and then you have Amazon Inspector that goes through this and detects that there's a new version of Apache available, and the current one that you're running actually is a security threat. So what that would do is you could then patch the system. You can then trigger a Lambda function to create a hardened AMI, update your CloudFormation template, and also your Git repository for version control. And then in the next, maybe a next auto-scaling when that takes place, it will use the newly created resource with the new patched AMI rather than deploying the security risk. So I have a really cool example here, the event response automation playbook. When we talk about automation, this is a cool one, right? So we have an adversary who's trying to break through to your system, or maybe an intern, let's call him Bob. And maybe the adversary is trying to get Bob to break into the system. And then you have your environment, you have CloudWatch events, and then you have your Lambda responder. And this is an automation playbook. These are the ingredients required for it. Let's take a look at what the scenario is. So the idea here is to deal with an issue which highlights the haplessness of Bob, an intern. And we want to ensure that the instance that the EC2 instance that he wants to launch is actually within an appropriate subnet, within an appropriate security group, and an approved AMI. So Bob happily goes and launches an EC2 instance. He identifies he provides the AMI details, the subnet, and the security group where he would like to have this deployed. That triggers a Lambda function. That triggers a CloudWatch event that would then feed into a Lambda responder. Well, the first Lambda responder here is actually checking if the AMI is approved, if the AMI is using the correct subnet, and if it is launched with the approved security group. You can, well, you're checking these through your policies, right? Hardwiring policies into a Lambda function is actually, you'd have all sorts of fun dealing with it. So the best way to do it is to either put it into S3 or even better, DynamoDB, which is an obvious choice when you want to look for complex queries like indexing and things like that for these complex queries. So it does a quick check, and that then triggers an event, a CloudWatch event. Well, what we do here is once it's checking it's checking the policy, and what does it find? It finds that, oh dear, Bob is launching an instance or an AMI which we consider not suitable for it. So that goes again and kicks off a CloudWatch event, which will then kick off your second L2 responder, which is your Lambda function, which will go ahead and kill that instance for you. So this is just an example of an automated playbook, and you can customize it as you like. And these are some of the resources for that section, and which brings us on to protecting your data at rest, in transit, and in use. Is it though? What mandates data in transit? Well, that is really up to a customer's own risk appetite. But let's look at some of the tools that can help you with this. We have AWS Cloud HSM, which is your key management, single dedicated tenancy, your hardware security module, which you can use for key management. And unless it's mandated by compliance and regulatory reasons why you'd need a cloud HSM, you could just use AWS's key management service. Right? Key management service, again, it does, as it says on the tin, it is a managed service which allows you to create controls, encryption keys that is used to encrypt your data. And then, of course, you have AWS's certificate manager. If you've ever been in a situation where you're wondering whether that lifetime and expiry on a certificate that is applied, that provides HTTPS for your web servers, then ACM actually does that for you. A month ago, we will update the public and private certificates, which is what it does. So if that wasn't super clear, the certificate manager itself it allows you to easily provision and manage both public and private certificates, SSL, TLS, for the use for a lot of your AWS services. Moving on to protecting data, which is encryption. So you have encryption in transit and at rest. And of course, you can use SSL, TLS. We talked about ACM, which provides you with those certificates to apply it to the external of your infrastructure. When you're thinking about communicating through on-premise or your offices where you have into your AWS account, consider using VPNs, right? Or even direct connect like we talked about, or IPsec tunnels. And then again, for SSH, make sure that you're using, the least that you're doing is using SSH for if you're using Bastion hosts as a jump. Encryption at rest is available at the object, the database, file system, as well as disk level. And when you go calling an AWS API, we're using TLS on our endpoints. So it's TLS 1.2, and it's available. We're rolling it out across everywhere. And when you're looking at connectivity from a management of data or data transfer, of course, use VPN to your connectivity for your VPCs. You can also secure external communications using elastic load balancers, application load balancers, or CloudFront when you're using ACM. Network load balancers operate at layer 4, and because of which you do not get SSL termination there. But you can always encrypt the packets that then trickle down into your application. When building your own services and building your own encryption keys, you could actually bring your own keys as well and incorporate that within application elastic load balancers as well as CloudFront. Right, data in transit. We have a lot of places where multiple services that actually support data at rest as well. So you have S3, which is where you can select KMS key on upload, or you have EBS and RDS snapshots, which are automatically encrypted data at rest. And DynamoDB has encrypted backup. If you're using encryption if you choose to use Glacier for archival purposes, and also have encryption in place, making sure that that data is encrypted, you may need to doubly encrypt your data at S3 layer before you upload it, and then that lifecycle policy that pushes it into Glacier. But it's better to doubly encrypt your data than not encrypt it at all. So that's a good one to remember. And like I said, you can bring your own keys, even when you're using KMS. You can encrypt your data locally before you then upload it, or you can have server-side encryption with customer key. I have a whole slide on AWS KMS. It's pretty much a one-stop shop for symmetric encryption. It offers AES 256, and that is the only algorithm that it does. So it doesn't do any other algorithms, and we've integrated it with a whole load of services as well. It does both AWS's server-side encryption as well as client-side encryption, and there are lots of services that we've put down there so that you could easily relate to. What it also does is every key that is accessed with KMS produces a record in CloudTrail. And that is an important one to remember, because even if we are transparently decrypting it for you and allowing you to attach an encrypted EBS volume to an EC2 instance, say, for example, that would still mean that it would create a log, an audit log in CloudTrail, and that would just be called out as AWS internal. and you'll be able to see that. So that's the level of transparency that it maintains. And it's the whole idea of KMS is to be able to, is built with the intention to be able to easily integrate, which you'll notice it has. Well, one last thing about KMS, that it is available in all commercial regions except for China. And these are some of the resources. This is actually, I'm gonna talk a little bit about this one because it talks about KMS. If you're interested in AWS's KMS crypto details, that's a really good document to be able to go through and have a look at. Amazon Macy, which I haven't talked about a lot, but it's as you may all know, that it's a fairly new service that was released last year. And then it has Cloud HSM, EBS, S2N, which is a really good talk as well on one of the reInvent events. And then mitigating DDoS attacks on AWS. So preparing for security events. When you think about preparing for these, make sure that you have, in spite of the fact that you have a mature preventive and detective solution in place, you should always consider a mitigation plan, right? The runbook that we spoke about, the example that I provided, is the one that I encourage you guys to actually have within your environments. Automation, CI/CD pipelines, whether you're using CloudFormation or Terraform, or having runbooks to automatically do something for you on your behalf is actually quite useful. It really does. It's a really good tool to have in your back pocket when you're, if there are inconsistent responses, to avoid panic, knee-jerk reactions as well. Start with a clean room. You have use tags to quickly determine the impact and escalate. So if you have tagged resources, resource groups, and data sensitivity in detection of a breach, you can then quickly see the impact if you have tagging in place. There are additional tags, such as owner of a service, that could be useful in this case, or you have the right people when you have escalations or incidents calls in place, which I've noticed are actually quite useful to have handy. You can then use API to automatically remove a potential breach from a system, so such as from a load balancer, for example, by changing the security group, so that's avoiding trickling that down into the rest of your instances. And you should then replace the instance with a fresh one, and like we discussed on one of the other slides as well. You can obviously use CloudFormation that we talked about, which will then be used to recreate a new trusted environment, which is fresh and start from scratch. One of the other resources that I really wanted to talk about is AWS is well architected. So I'm not sure how many of you here are aware of the well architected framework. We do. When you reach out and speak to solutions architects, or reach out through your account teams, if you haven't already, I urge you to speak to your account teams, find out who is aligned to that, so that you can come down, have conversations with us as solutions architects. And more than likely, if you have a full-fledged multiple accounts or a full-fledged service running within AWS or any of these, we actually go through this well-architected framework, right? It consists of 5 papers, white papers that are available for you guys to search online. And when you talk about the well-architected framework, you look at the security pillar, and each of these pillars have about between 10 to 15 questions. These questions actually make you think. They make you think about the way your infrastructure is set up, the way your security is applied onto those accounts. Some of the questions would be in terms of, so let me name the 5 for you. It's security, performance, reliability, cost optimization, and of course, the one which is security. And each of those, like I mentioned, has 10 to 15 questions. You go through those within your teams, you have the right number of people. When we do perform a well-architected review with you guys, we do expect the right number of people to be there in the room, right? So it could be your networking team, your security team, your key decision makers about what gets implemented how, your development teams, your testing teams, and who can answer some of these questions. And I urge you to read this, especially the security white paper, because that gives you a lot more insight into how you can go about with implementing some of your the security services within your accounts. There was also a really cool, the CIS Foundation benchmark actually does go through a lot more detail as well about things that we talked about when it comes to security groups or VPCs or setting up various VPCs within the same account, making sure that you don't have overlapping CIDRs between the two VPCs or multiple VPCs that you could have in one of the accounts or multiple accounts, which is why we talk about using AWS organizations. And then there's one which is the AWS crypto intro, which then goes through a lot more details into crypto. If that's something that you guys are interested in and just have a quick read through, then that is a good one to go through as well. Then there was the AWS reInvent security track, which was from last year, 2017. And it has everything security that was, whether it was released last year, whether it was links and videos and content to a lot more resources that you could have a look at to keep up to pace, because we know that we've got a plethora of services right now. It is difficult to keep up with the pace, but everything new when it comes to security, we're making sure that we reach out to as many customers and as big an audience that we possibly can. So summing up, some of the things that I wanted to talk about was enforcing separation of duties and least privileges, which I think we have talked a lot on. That is an important one to remember. When you're talking about federating users, like I said, you can federate it with, federation is a good thing, and you can use personally identifiable information, which you can take away from IAM itself if you're just doing group-to-group level federation. And then, of course, you have security logs, which are separated from your troubleshooting logs. So make sure that there is that layer of separation between the two. Talking about logging, and we emphasize the importance of it, storage for the logs is cheap, right? You can use S3 for it. You can do bulk uploads. You can run analysis on it later, depending on what, for improvisations for your further infrastructure or architectures. You can, but then the consequences of missing out through something not being logged may not be cheap, right? For all you know, there'd be a price that you pay just because you weren't logging a certain set when it comes to VPC flow logs, say, for example, what goes through in and out of your VPCs. And so that is an important one to remember. Alerting is obviously good. We did look at a number of ways where, things that you can plug into Slack channels where you could have PagerDuty alerts and things like that when things go wrong. But try and automate your environments. It's important that you do that, because then you don't have human interventions between your infrastructure. So you have repeatable, deployable infrastructure, the same set, which matches your production environments. And you can let the dev and your test team do all sorts of fun things in their personal accounts or in their own individual dev or test accounts, rather than actually affecting your production workloads, which is quite crucial, right? That's an important one to remember. We did talk about using managed services and built-in reporting to offload and automate. So yes, again, we did talk about built-in reporting. We talked about guard duty. We talked about web application firewalls and fun things that guard duty can do. It does obviously have, it works on machine learning. so it's constantly iterating, and our teams are working extremely fast and really hard in terms of what kind of findings, guard duty findings, that they could actually add into, and that they're able to add to the features of guard duty. And then to see the bigger picture, right? Think big. One of our leadership principles, in fact, is if you don't know what our leadership principles are, we have just search for Amazon leadership principles, and it will come up with 14 of them that we live, breathe, and eat. And think big is one of them, right? So think about the bigger picture. What information do you need, and which tools can help you get there? So it's important to go through each of those to make sure that you're covering all of the different aspects when it comes to security, whether it's security at the external level, where you're communicating outside, whether you're talking about, but the physical one we take responsibility of, so you don't need to worry about that. And like I said, read the SOC report if you want to know how we do it. But then, of course, you have different layers. So you have your networking layer, where you have your security groups and your network access control lists. You have your routing tables. You have your internet gateways that you could then use. And limit it at application load balancers or CloudFront, where you could have WAF, your web application firewalls, that would then loop in with on the outside. So those are external communications. And then when you look at a 3-tier web architecture, say, for example, you have your web servers, you have your application servers, and then you have your database servers. The communication between each of those can then be separated by NACLs. So make sure that when communication between these layers takes place, so say, for example, your application layer talking to your database layer, the only port that it needs is 3306 to be able to communicate, and make sure that that's the only port that is actually open when you're assigning that to a security group, right? It's simple as that. Everything else doesn't need to be open. No other ports needs to be open. When you're talking about hardening your AMIs, when you're talking about patching, when you're talking about operating system level, those are the key things that you want to be able to remember when you're thinking about security. And again, start with least privilege principle. Really, really, really important. When people don't require access to resources, don't give it to them. When services don't require, or when one resource doesn't require access to another resource, it's not required, it doesn't need to be done. Right? Make sure you have policies, and you have really, really fine-grained policies that you can actually configure and deploy these when you attach them into groups or when you have them into roles. So make sure that is done. Related but not so related, a fact that I would like to share with you guys is we at AWS, you know, when you look at all of these hundreds of services that we have, ever wondered how we go about doing this? Well, 90 to 95% of our roadmap is based on customer feedback. It's what you tell us is important for you, and that's when our product teams actually work backwards from there. So we work backwards from our customers. And one thing that I would urge you to do today is rate all of the presentations that you've seen today, because those are really important so that we can have more useful content for you guys, and we can help you understand these concepts better. Thank you.